everyone. Thank you for tuning into this little video. I'm here with Dr. Andrew Mead, and we're going to talk a little about his 5 etudes for solo tenor saxophone, which I'll be recording the first etude on my upcoming album, Delta Waves. You can check out my website, andrewhosler.com/Delta Waves, to find out more information about the track listing, upcoming performances of the music from the album, and where you can get involved through the Kickstarter. So thank you, Dr. Mead, for agreeing to meet with me.
It's a pleasure. It's great to see you.
Yeah, so you have quite an extensive compositional output for the saxophone. When did that all begin? How did you come to work with so many different saxophonists?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, let's see. Back in, I think it was like 1988, I wrote a solo oboe piece for Harry Sargas, who was on the faculty at the University of Michigan. Uh, and he performed it. It was very tough. And for some reason, I think it was Kellen Thomas who came across the score and said, "Would you like to hear this on saxophone?" Now, uh, I was in part. That's not my earliest contact with the saxophone, but that. Let me go on with that story. That was Shayna, or now I guess Shayna 1, because I have two more. Um, and it was sort of an operatic scene for a solo wind instrument. I was thinking about oboe, but as soon as I heard Kellen play it on the alto, oh, it blew me away. And Tim McAllister, who was part of Don Cinta's studio at that point, said to me, "Hey, can I have a copy of the score?" And he took it, and he played it in. It was one of the national saxophone conferences. This was at in Chicago, and I was sitting with Kellen, and Tim. Kellen's performance was beautiful, wonderful, poetic. Uh, and then Tim played it, and Tim played it as a drop dead virtuoso piece. And I was sitting next to Kellen, and Kellen looked at me and said, "I think I better go practice." But both of their performances, this is probably my most frequently played saxophone piece. Uh, and every time I've heard it, it sounded different. The notes and rhythms have been right and all that, but the character of the piece very much has reflected the individual players. And I love that because I figure composition is co-creative. Well, that was the beginning of things. I had actually tried to write some music for saxophone earlier for another member of the studio, and that piece fell apart. I was trying to write it. In fact, it turned into what became my first concerto for alto sax and what is it, 12 or 13 players, I think. Uh, uh, Tim McAllister went on to play that and play it extraordinarily well. I still cherish that recording that we made of the concert. And then I was sort of off and running. I am in love with the whole range of the families. I've written a couple of saxophone quartets. I've written several pieces that involve saxophones uh, as part of chamber ensembles. Uh, Dan Grazer said to me once, he said, "I want you to write 24 etudes for saxophone, but not too long. Don't make it the Paganini caprices." So I said, "Okay, 24 caprices." I wrote 24 short little pieces one summer, and he's played them all and does them extremely well. And these things have just accrued. I think I've never actually counted them, or haven't been a long time since I counted how many pieces I've written involving the saxophone, but the number keeps going up. I have two concertos for alto sax at this point. Uh, I wrote a couple of years ago. I wrote a piece for soprano saxophone, cello, vibraphone, and harpsichord, which is yet to be performed. That was at the request of a harpsichordist who gave me the traditional response to my music, which is, "I love it, thank you," and then you never hear another word.
You don't hear a lot of 21st century harpsichord music.
No, no. Well, he's a harpsichordist over in England, and well, the plans fell through. What can I say? But
Mhm.
I have the piece, and I like the piece, so there it is. So I both
Well,
let's see, my most recent. I wrote the tenor etudes for you.
mhm,
Then I wrote a quartet for uh, trumpet, alto saxophone, piano, and bass, which is yet to be performed. The trumpet
mhm,
part is killer. Uh, then last summer, I wrote a second sonata for alto saxophone and piano for James Humble,
mhm.
and a set of fantasy etudes for soprano, solo soprano saxophone. So it's about
Mhm.
time for me to write another saxophone piece.
Yes, you need to write a piece for baritone saxophone now.
I've used baritone in the two quartets, but other than that,
Mhm,
I used it in a wind ensemble piece once too. Love the
mhm,
instrument, not quite sure how to
mhm.
fit it into chamber music. So,
No, it's a great instrument. It's what I'm playing in quartet right now,
uh,
and I have not played it as much as I would like to. But and Sana was actually the first work I had heard of yours on Dr. McAllister's album
oh, that
of
goes
the
back.
same name. But actually, how you and I came into contact wasn't composition at all. We came into contact because of music theory. I
Yes.
was during my undergrad doing a paper on Milton Babbitt's accompanied recitative for soprano saxophone and piano, and I was very stumped something very early on, and all the faculty at Bowling Green just said, "Email Dr. Mead, like he'll know what to do." And I did, and here we are today, probably about a year later,
Yeah.
or more than a year later.
Just a little more than a year later, but
Mhm,
it's funny. That piece turns out to be very strange in terms of its construction.
mhm,
It's I had to talk with a couple of friends about to figure out what the heck was going on in it. I but it's a 12 part all partition array,
mhm.
just 2 seconds
Yes.
of it, and the way it's distributed within the instruments is interesting. It's a cute little piece. I got to say I love it.
Yeah, it's what, 2.5 minutes, but very, very dense in what is actually happening within the piece.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you know, I have never taught composition professionally. I mean, I've given some lessons
mhm,
here and there, but my my day job, so to speak, although it's been a darn good day job, I'll say that, has
mhm.
been teaching music theory and doing music theoretical work. So, in a sense, composing is my avocation rather than my vocation. So,
Mhm. And I remember our conversation from there. I started to talk to you about some of your compositions, and I realized that I saw Murphy Music Press. You had your fantasy quartet with tenor saxophone with the Webern quartet instrumentation,
right, right.
but
Uh,
and I kept looking through, and I was like, this and the quartet in the saxophone quartet are the only pieces with tenor. Like a solo tenor piece would be fantastic. And you were nice enough to write a beautiful set of etudes.
well, it was one of those things where the the iron was hot, and you came along and struck it, and
Mhm.
there it just sort of appeared. So,
And why did you decide to write etudes specifically? Because, like you've mentioned, I know you have the 12 caprices for soprano saxophone. You have some etudes written. You have bagatelles. You have different versions of Sena. Why specifically etudes for this piece?
well, I that's a very good question. I'm trying to remember. I have a set of 6 concert etudes for alto saxophone,
Mhm,
and that those came about because James Humble had asked me to write. He wanted to. He said, "Giving Shina to my students is it's too long a song. So
mhm,
they look at it and pass out. Can you write
mhm,
pieces with some of the same difficulties but in shorter time spans?"
mhm,
So I thought, okay, well these will be studies, uh, technical studies.
mhm,
The piece turns out to be, in my own mind, uh, you can play each individual movement, but the whole piece, which is about a half an hour long, could stand, if you could stand to hear a half an hour of solo alto saxophone. It could stand as a single big composition. So I sort of wanted to think the same way when I was writing the solo pieces for tenor, that I think that a somewhat shorter span, it's about 17 and a half minutes, I guess.
Mhm.
Uh, that could stand as a single composition. There's a kind of rhetorical arch to the whole five movements of it. But I also wanted the individual movements to be usable uh, for 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 concert works or just for practicing. They're not
Mhm.
easy, as I don't need to tell you. Uh, so I figure, well, they're etudes because they're drawing on the kind of technical demands that are at the edge of playing, but
Mhm.
but they're also concert pieces, I think.
It no, it's absolutely gorgeous work, and I remember when you first because you sent some sketches throughout, and I remember very early on you sent a sketch of the first etude, and like you said, it is very difficult, but it is so rewarding. I think it's just an absolutely gorgeous piece. So often
Thank
with
you.
the tenor saxophone, um, I feel like we forget that it can be very beautiful, and I think that with this piece, that beauty can really shine through.
I'm glad. I I appreciate everything you've said. I mean, I write these things, I send them out, and to hear any echo at all, if it's somewhere, is wonderful. And I have to say, the saxophone world has been a very rewarding place to be involved in. First of all, uh, players such as yourself, but lots of players in addition to yourself are willing to take on anything. And sort of like you send them a challenge, they'll say, "Here, give me a minute," and then they come back and they've done it. That's amazing. You try that with, oh, I hate to pick on people, but strings, and strings say, why should we learn anything after 1897? I mean, after all, that's when Brahms died. There's no music since then. So, uh,
Yeah, saxophonists are hungry for new music, and we strive. I'm very happy to think that we strive to perform works by living composers, perform 20th and 21st century music, and we perform that because that's what we have,
yeah,
being
and
such a young instrument.
it's a very exciting world to look at. When I wrote that solo oboe piece for Harry Sarkis, he performed it, and a bassoonist from an ensemble that he played in walked up to me. I'd never met her before, and said, "If you had done this to a dog, you'd be in jail by now." And so I figured, well, maybe the traditional instrumental world is not for me. A few years ago, James Umble and I did a kind of exchange paper talking about some of my saxophone music, and I titled it, "If You Had Done That to a Dog, You'd Be in Jail by Now," subtitle being The Saxophone Music of Andrew Mead. Unfortunately, the journal that it was sent to was so taken aback by the title that they just said, "No, thank you." I don't know. Someday we'll get that out somewhere, I guess. But
Well, yeah, and I know with saying that I know so many people that have played it on saxophone. I have a friend working on it now. I've heard many recordings from Michigan students performing the work. So we love the piece, and we are very happy to perform it.
I am very appreciative. I've heard it played on soprano saxophone as well, and it sounds
Mm,
terrific on soprano. Uh,
mm,
I am happy that it's something that people enjoy taking the challenge of playing that. Playing that.
mm,
My music tends to be very difficult, as you
mm,
know pretty well. Uh, but that's just how it comes out.
mm.
And so I've tried to I've tried even to think about simplifying my style. I can't do it. I just you learn a language and then you speak it. What can I say?
Well, that actually transitions into a couple other things I wanted to ask you about with in terms of your compositional process. First, you said that your day job is doing music theory, and that's like what you do at Indiana right now. Where did you? Is that what you formally studied, or did you study composition as well?
No, I studied composition.
Mhm.
But if you could call it studying, I mean, studying composition sounds. Uh, I let me stop that sentence and start again. Um, I did my graduate work at Princeton. I went to Princeton because I just wanted to get. I was very interested in Milton Babbitt's music.
Mhm.
Milton Babbitt turned out to be wondrously unforthcoming with music, but and his composition lessons were were kind of hysterical. In the sense, you'd bring him something and he'd look at it and then he'd start talking about whatever was interesting to him. So there was
Mhm.
very little interaction, very little response over what I was doing, but that was fine because just listening to him talk, and he was quite a talker, was
Mhm.
fascinating. I learned an awful lot just paying attention.
Mhm.
Uh, but came out with a graduate degree in composition and could not find a job in that field. So I said, well, I've got some essays here that I could perhaps publish in theory journals, and I did, and
Mhm.
started applying to theory jobs. Landed at University of Michigan first as a 1 year uh, sort of what visiting
Mhm.
professor, and then picked up as a tenure track professor, and that was it. I very quickly taught myself tonal theory so I could teach the freshmen. I
Mhm.
started off one class ahead of them because I had had terrible undergraduate education in tonal music.
Mhm.
But sort of, I figured out, well, how would I teach myself this? And
Mhm.
figured out, I'd hate to have been one of my students back then, but figured out how to teach it. And I love teaching it. But
Mhm.
that's not my natural language, if you can talk about natural language. I just was composing in the voice that was in me.
Mhm.
But wound up teaching theory for 30 years, published a bunch of articles, published a book,
Mhm.
bunch of things like that. A lot of
Yes, a
people,
fantastic book that helped me a lot in my later undergraduate years studying some of Milton Babbitt's music.
oh, well, good, good, thanks. but, 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 but composing was on essentially on the side. It's,
So you talked a little about natural language, and I'm curious to know how that translates to what is your compositional process like for this piece or really for any piece? Where do you start? What is the first thing you compose, and how do you expand it out into a larger work?
that's an excellent question. Let me give you a little bit of my background because the
Mhm.
term natural language, uh, I if I actually use that term, and I very well might, uh, I don't want to say that that's necessarily innate. We're all conditioned by what we grow up around. For some reason, I got connected with the Schoenberg Violin Concerto when I was about 14, and it imprinted on me the way any kind of music imprints on people when they're 14.
Mhm.
I still love the piece. I still teach the piece. I still find new things in that piece. But uh, Schoenberg's 12-tone music, and then Carter, and then Babbitt, and any
Mhm.
number of Roger Sessions, any number of other people were kind of the music I soaked in.
Mhm.
Compositionally, I started off trying to write 12-tone music, and it sounded terrible because the 12-tone theory, as it was taught back then, uh, oh boy, that's a long conversation. I'll drop it now. But just let's just say that I took an order 12-tone row, tried to to make it music, and it did not sound like Schoenberg. It sounded
Mhm.
awful. So I figured I just want to write by my ear, and so I wrote some music like that. Then, in a sense, I got a better handle on how to think about 12-tone music. Started writing pieces based on 12-tone rows. Uh, my first alto saxophone concerto is a 12-tone piece. Absolutely
Mhm.
right there, 12-tone piece. Uh, I have some idiosyncratic ways of using it, but that's another story. And so then I found that I was sort of moving back and forth between very strict 12-tone composition and a kind of freer, intuitive musical continuity that was still based on aggregates, the whole 12 notes, but not adhering to any particular system of 12 tone rules. I think they're a system of rules. I don't know what it is, what they are. So that brings us up to the present day. When I start writing a piece, first start thinking about the feel of the piece as a whole. I need to have the sort of com- a feeling of the complete piece in my mind, not by any means in all sorts of details, but just the scope, the affect, the maybe some gestures, and I might make a couple of sketch notes to myself about openings or something like that. I'll often spend a few minutes writing the opening of something and seeing if that has any promise, and I'll save all that stuff. I go back and pick up that sort of thing sometimes years later. Um, but in the case of your piece, uh, I thought of the tenor saxophone. I thought of the various ways I had learned to love the instrument over the years, which included any number of drop dead jazz giants. Now, I'm not trying to write music that sounds like jazz, but I am aware of what an influence all these players have had on me. And as soon as I allowed myself that in, uh, stuff started happening. And I started spinning things. You'll see some sort of covert references to particular solos from over the years in the piece, but they're not there to be fished out. Let me put it that way. I hope they're absorbed well enough, and they're more paraphrased than anything else. So.
So, is there anything else you wanted to share about the piece, or anything you think any of the listeners would be interested to hear?
I I always think of my music, even at its uh, most intense, as being primarily about lyricism.
Mhm.
And I think you captured that in the performance I heard you give of this last spring. The sense that even though there
Thank you.
are a lot of notes going by,
Mhm.
the long range sense of a lyrical unfolding is very important to me as I think of a piece, and that came through in your performance vividly.
Well,
So,
thank you so much. I remember when I first, when you first sent the final piece, looking at the program notes where it says the metronome markings are merely suggestions as long as the expressive, important part of the passage is brought forth, and that's something I really took to heart. So thank you. That means a lot.
well, you're talking about something that's very important to me. That I think of a score. I think of a work of music as essentially being co-creative between
Mhm.
the person who draws the dots and the person who turns the dots into sound. And then thirdly, it's between those two and the person who's listening to the resulting
Mhm.
sound. It is, to me, a profoundly creative act just to listen to a piece of music,
Mhm.
because you're trying to trace your way through that piece, and that there can be multiple ways of doing that. I'm not saying there's one right way of listening to a piece of music, but the fact that there are multiple ways of hearing any piece of music is to me meaning that there is an active component to listening, just as there's an active component to making choices far beyond what can be put into a score.
Mhm.
So I like to trust players to to if they're willing to take on my music, they're going to find something. I hope, and
Mhm.
they're going to take the time to figure out how to make the piece go. They're not just reading down the dots. They're just not trying to play in tune and play on time,
Mhm.
as I've heard some players suggest is their primary job.
Mhm.
The whole aspect, and I blame Wagner. Well, I blame Wagner for everything, but uh, uh, at the same time, I'm entranced by Wagner, so it's a difficult place to be. But the idea that you have to do exactly that is, I think, antithetical to what I see as being uh, good music making as a communal activity.
Mhm. Yeah, I know I instantly fell in love with the piece the first time I sat and started reading through that opening motive that comes back at the end of the first movement. I instantly it was what the tenor saxophone needed, what the saxophone needed, and what I needed as a
Oh,
performer. Like it's perfect. It's exactly what it's exactly what I was hoping. It's a tenor saxophone work by Dr. Andrew Mead, which is fantastic.
thanks so much for saying that. I really appreciate your work.
Well, and if anyone is interested in the sheet music, it's available on Murphy Music Press, correct?
That's right.
It is. And if you're interested in anything about hearing more about delta waves, my upcoming album, you can check out andrewhosler.com/delta waves. You can find this recording, a few interviews with some other composers, along with recordings from some pieces, upcoming concerts, and other information. If anyone's interested in getting into contact with you, how can they do that?
Well, I don't have a web page, but if you want to
Mhm.
email me at awmead, that's AWMEAD, at indiana.edu, I'll be happy to correspond with whoever gets in touch.
Great. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you, Dr. Mead.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.